On the afternoon of August 2nd, 216 before Christ, on a dusty plain in southern Italy called Cannae, a Carthaginian soldier walked the field and collected gold rings from the fingers of dead Roman aristocrats. He filled 3 bushels, 3 Roman bushels of rings, 26 liters, taken from the senators and equestrians of the Roman Republic in a single afternoon. By every law of ancient warfare, Rome should have surrendered the next day. What Rome did instead invented the entire Western strategic tradition. To understand Cannae, you need to understand the man who won it. His name was Hannibal Barca. He was 31 years old. He was the son of the Carthaginian general Hannibal Barca, who had taught him as a child to swear eternal enmity against Rome. The city Carthage had lost the First Punic War to a generation earlier. In 218 before Christ, when he was 28, Hannibal led an army from Carthaginian-controlled Iberia across the Alps in winter, perhaps the most famous strategic march in military history. He started with 50,000 men and 37 war elephants. He arrived in northern Italy with 20,000 men and almost no elephants. Over the next 2.5 years, he did to the Roman Republic what no one had done in 150 years. At the Trebia in December 218, he annihilated a Roman army of 40,000. At Lake Trasimene in June 217, he ambushed and destroyed another Roman army of 25,000, 2 consular armies dead in 18 months. The road to Rome was open. The Senate decided to crush him with sheer mass. In the spring of 216, Rome assembled the largest army in its history, 86,000 men, 8 Roman legions, plus 8 allied Socii legions. Every able-bodied citizen the Republic could draft. 2 consular commanders, alternating command daily, Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a cautious aristocrat who had opposed offering battle on open terrain, and Gaius Terentius Varro, a populist who had won the election by promising the people of Rome quick victory. The arrangement was unprecedented. 2 consuls had never before shared a single army in the field at this scale. The Senate's logic was simple. Even Hannibal could not defeat numbers like these. Across from them, Hannibal had 50,000 men, 40,000 infantry, 10,000 cavalry, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1. The 2 armies marched south through Apulia. They camped near the village of Cannae, an old Roman supply depot that Hannibal had captured to provoke battle. The terrain was flat. The Romans would have room to deploy their massive numerical advantage. Varro looked at the ground and thought it perfect. It was, just not in the way he thought. The morning of the 2nd of August, the 2 armies took the field. The Romans deployed in maximum density, tighter, deeper ranks than standard Roman tactical doctrine. The thinking was elementary: concentrate the weight, drive through the Carthaginian center, win by sheer momentum. What Hannibal had done across from them in the night before is still taught at every major military academy on Earth, 2,200 years later, as the perfect tactical deployment. His army was arranged in a convex crescent, bulging forward toward the Romans. In the center, Hannibal's weakest troops, Gauls and Iberians, newly recruited Celtic tribesmen, and Spanish light infantry. Their job was not to win. Their job was to give ground. Behind them, on the wings, held in deep columns, Hannibal's elite African veterans, the core of the Carthaginian army, heavy infantry trained in the Macedonian phalanx tradition, and on the flanks, heavy Spanish cavalry on Hannibal's right, light Numidian cavalry on his left. The Roman infantry charged. The Gauls and Iberians fought hard. They did not break. They gave ground. Slowly, deliberately, bending backward like a bow under strain. The Romans pushed deeper and deeper and deeper. Sensing victory, they pressed harder. On the flanks, the Carthaginian heavy cavalry shattered the Roman horse and rode around behind the Roman infantry. The Numidians chased the other Roman cavalry off the field, then turned back and joined the encirclement. By the time the Roman commanders realized what was happening, the geometry had already trapped them. The Carthaginian center had bent so far backward that the Roman mass had pushed between the African veteran columns held on each wing. The African veterans wheeled inward, enveloping the Romans from both sides. The cavalry sealed the rear. 86,000 Romans found themselves packed into a shrinking circle they could not break out of. The ranks toward the center could not raise their swords. The men on the outside were being cut down at every step. The Carthaginians methodically slaughtered them from every direction for 8 hours. By sunset, the Roman army of 86,000 had ceased to exist. 50,000 were dead. Among them, the consul Paulus, who had not wanted to fight on this ground, 2 former consuls, 29 military tribunes, and somewhere between 80 and 100 Roman senators. The political class of the Republic, slaughtered in a single afternoon. That night, Carthaginian soldiers walked the field and collected gold rings from the fingers of dead Roman aristocrats. Hannibal's brother Mago sent 3 Roman bushels of rings back to Carthage as proof of victory. Mago dumped them on the floor of the Carthaginian Senate. By every law of ancient warfare, by every Greek, Persian, Egyptian, Carthaginian convention, the war was over. This episode is brought to you by an applied history community that studies what comes after catastrophe, not the catastrophes themselves, the institutional response to them, the states that decided to keep fighting after losing half their elite, the doctrines that turn tactical disaster into strategic victory, the political reflexes that no school teaches. If you want the unedited archive, the cases, the institutional moments, the decisions made in the 72 hours after the worst day in a nation's history, the link is in the description. Now cart ye back to the morning after Cannae. That night Hannibal sat in his command tent and waited. His cavalry commander Maharbal urged him to march immediately on Rome. The road was open. The Republic had no army left in Italy. Within 5 days, they would be at the city walls. Hannibal refused. He was not a Greek tyrant or a Persian autocrat. He was a Carthaginian general operating within Carthaginian strategic culture. The pattern after a victory of this scale was diplomatic. The loser would send ambassadors. There would be negotiations. Carthage would dictate terms. Maharbal reportedly said something to him then that Polybius would record 60 years later in the most cited sentence in military history. You know how to win victories, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use them. Hannibal sent envoys to Rome to discuss prisoner exchange and peace terms. He sent a senior Carthaginian named Carthalo to the gates of the city. In Rome, meanwhile, something nobody in the ancient world had ever seen was beginning to happen. The Senate had met the day after Cannae. The casualty count was known. Half the Italian allies were starting to defect. The city of Capua, the second largest city in Italy, was already negotiating with Hannibal. There was no Roman army left in the field. Hannibal was uncontested on Italian soil. By every law of ancient politics, the meeting would consist of 2 questions: which senators would form the embassy, and what terms could be salvaged. That is not what happened. The Roman Senate that day passed a series of decrees. Public mourning was banned beyond a fixed 30-day period. Women were forbidden from appearing in public to weep. Families were forbidden from displaying mourning insignia. All public business resumed the second day after the catastrophe. The political logic was explicit. Visible mourning would discourage further military service and signal weakness to the allies, who were watching to see whether Rome would survive. The Senate drafted 8,000 slaves into a new legion, promising them freedom after the war. They armed them with weapons stripped from the temples of Rome, votive offerings that earlier generations had dedicated after earlier victories, taken down from temple walls and reissued to the slave legion. When Hannibal's envoy, Carthalo, arrived at the city walls to negotiate, the Roman Senate refused to admit him into the city. The Senate's position, articulated 63 years earlier by Appius Claudius Caecus against another foreign general named Pyrrhus, was now applied with full force again. Rome does not negotiate while a foreign army stands on Italian soil. Hannibal received no embassy. He received no message of surrender. He received instead the news that Rome had built another army and was building another after that. For the first time, Hannibal began to understand the war he was actually in. The Roman response, militarily, was to return to a strategy the Republic had rejected 6 months earlier as humiliating. Before Cannae, when Hannibal had been winning every engagement, the Senate had appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus dictator. Fabius had developed a strategy: never fight Hannibal in pitched battle, shadow him with a parallel Roman army, cut off his forager parties, scorch the countryside ahead of him so his army could not feed. The strategy was militarily sound. It was politically unbearable. Roman senators wanted decisive victory. The populist Varro had won the consulship of 216 by promising exactly that. Fabius was given the contemptuous nickname Cunctator, the delayer. After Cannae, no Roman in his right mind argued with Fabius any longer. For the next 14 years, Rome practiced the Fabian strategy without naming it. Roman armies shadowed Hannibal across Italy. They never engaged him in pitched battle. They captured back cities he had taken: Capua in 211 BCE, Tarentum in 209, Syracuse in 212. They built up new manpower from the still loyal core of central Italian allies. They opened second fronts in Iberia, Sicily, and Macedonia to pressure Carthage on multiple theaters at once. Hannibal moved through Italy for 14 years, undefeated in battle. He could not be defeated in battle, so Rome refused to give him battles. By 203 before Christ, 13 years after Cannae, Hannibal commanded perhaps 15,000 men in southern Italy and could no longer maneuver at scale. In the meantime, a young Roman aristocrat named Publius Cornelius Scipio, who at the age of 19 had been a junior military tribune at Cannae and had survived the slaughter, had risen through the Roman military hierarchy. At age 26, Scipio took command of the Iberian theater. Over 4 years, he drove the Carthaginians out of Spain entirely. In 204 before Christ, he invaded Africa itself. Carthage had no choice. They recalled Hannibal from Italy. After 14 years in Italy, undefeated, the man who had won the greatest tactical victory in ancient history boarded a ship back to a homeland he had not seen since he was a child. He was about to lose the war. The Battle of Zama was fought on the 19th of October, 202 before Christ, on a plain in modern Tunisia. The 44-year-old Hannibal commanded an army of 45,000, including 80 war elephants. The 33-year-old Scipio had 35,000. Hannibal had the numbers. Scipio had something Hannibal had not faced before. Scipio had spent 4 years in Iberia studying Carthaginian tactics. He had drilled his army specifically in anti-elephant techniques, deliberately leaving gaps in the maniple formations through which panicking elephants could be channeled harmlessly through to the rear. When Hannibal's elephants charged, the Roman lines parted. The elephants ran through the gaps and were killed by skirmishers behind the lines. Hannibal's strategic shock weapon failed for the first time. On the flanks, the Numidian cavalry king Massinissa, who had once fought for Carthage and now fought against it, drove Hannibal's cavalry from the field. Massinissa's cavalry returned and enveloped Hannibal's rear. The exact maneuver Hannibal had used at Cannae, now used against him. Hannibal lost, 20,000 Carthaginian dead. The 44-year-old general escaped the field. Carthage surrendered. The peace terms were severe. Carthage paid 10,000 talents of silver indemnity over 50 years. Carthage gave up all overseas territories. Carthage could not make war anywhere without Roman permission. Carthage was reduced to a single city-state. Rome was now the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. Over the next 50 years, Rome reshaped the entire Western Mediterranean: Macedonia, Greece, Spain, slowly, methodically, always preserving the doctrine, outlast any single defeat, never negotiate while an enemy is on Italian soil, build another army. In the year 149 before Christ, 67 years after Zama, Cato the Elder was ending every Senate speech with the line, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. In 146 before Christ, Rome destroyed it. Scipio Aemilianus, the adopted grandson of the Scipio who had won Zama, broke into Carthage after a 3-year siege. The city was burned. Its surviving population was killed or enslaved. Its walls were razed. Its territory was annexed as the Roman province of Africa. The legend that Rome sowed salt into Carthage's fields is a later invention, a 19th century embellishment that no ancient historian records. What Rome actually did was simpler and more permanent. It erased Carthage from political existence. Hannibal won the greatest tactical victory in ancient history at Cannae. Carthage no longer existed 70 years later. Rome had discovered something at Cannae that no other ancient civilization had grasped. Wars are not won by winning battles. Wars are won by refusing to lose them. This is the doctrine that defined the Western strategic tradition for the next 22 centuries. In 1781, the British army under Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown, an entire army lost to the American rebels. By every ancient convention of warfare, Britain had lost. Britain did not surrender its empire. Britain absorbed the American loss, regrouped, and kept its global empire for another 170 years. In 1941 to 1942, in the first 6 months of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Union lost over 5 million soldiers. More than every Western army would lose in the entire war. The Soviet political system did not break. By 1945, the Red Army was in Berlin. The lesson Rome wrote in its own blood on the 2nd of August, 216 before Christ, became the foundational rule of all imperial warfare. You don't win by avoiding catastrophic defeat. You win by refusing to acknowledge that catastrophic defeat is final. Here is the lesson of Cannae that almost nobody traces. Hannibal taught the world how to win battles. Rome taught the world how to win wars. Every military academy on Earth still teaches Cannae, the double envelopment, the bending crescent, the perfect tactical trap. Karl von Clausewitz studied it. B.H. Little Hart studied it. Erwin Rommel studied it. Norman Schwarzkopf studied it. But almost nobody teaches the second lesson of Cannae, the one that matters more, that a state is not destroyed by battlefield catastrophe. A state is destroyed by the political decision to acknowledge that battlefield catastrophe is final. Rome at Cannae lost 50,000 men in 8 hours. 20% of every male Roman citizen over the age of 17 died in the 3 years of the Second Punic War. By any rational calculation, the Republic was finished. The Senate, in the 72 hours after Cannae, made a political decision. Rome was not going to acknowledge that this was the end. They banned weeping. They drafted slaves. They refused to negotiate. They simply continued for 14 years until the war was won on terms they wrote themselves. This is the founding act of Western strategic culture. The states that have lasted longest in history are not the states that have won the most battles. They are the states that have institutionalized the refusal to acknowledge that battlefield catastrophe is decisive. Carthage forgot that for an afternoon in 216 before Christ, after the greatest tactical victory in human history. Carthage ceased to exist. In the British Museum, in the Naples Archaeological Museum, in the National Museum of Romanian History, there are display cases with Roman aristocratic gold rings recovered from various sites. We do not know which of them came from Cannae. 3 bushels of rings were taken to Carthage in the autumn of 216. Carthage was burned to the ground 70 years later. The rings were melted, scattered, lost. The plain where 86,000 Romans died is now a quiet Italian field with a small archaeological park. No major monument commemorates the dead. What remains of that afternoon is the Doctrine, the Roman reflex, the institutional refusal to acknowledge that a single defeat, no matter how catastrophic, is the end of the war. It is the operating system every major military power on Earth still works inside. History remembers what power forgets.